Welcome to the newest episode in a Legendarium series about the life and reign of King Richard III of England. In Part 3, Seizing the Crown, we will talk about the succession crisis caused by the unexpected death of King Edward IV and how Richard ultimately won that particular struggle. During his 1482 campaign against Scotland, Duke Richard of Gloucester burnished his credentials as a war leader. Meanwhile, his big brother King Edward IV grew fat and lazy. In his youth, King Edward IV had been a formidable war captain and knight, and at 6 feet 4.5 inches tall, he was a giant by the standards of his day. Yet after more than a decade of uninterrupted rule and too much time at the banquet table, Edward IV had grown fat. His cause of death is not known for certain, but he fell ill in April 1483. Edward remained strong enough to change his will. In its terms, he left his surviving brother Richard of Gloucester as the guardian of his son and heir, the future Edward V, only 12 years old at the time. Although Edward IV's death was probably related to pneumonia or typhoid fever, gossips at the time spread rumors of poisoning, which is likely untrue. By that time, Edward IV had achieved relative peace and prosperity and left behind a secured crown and large personal fortune. Uncle Richard, at first, swore allegiance to the new King Edward V from his power base at York. However, Richard soon faced a new rival in the king's widow, Elizabeth Woodville. Though from a relatively humble family, Elizabeth had married the king and secured the appointment of her brothers to high office. Likely determined to hold on to power, the Dowager Queen Elizabeth pushed to crown Edward V at once, without a regency for Uncle Richard. Immediately, Edward IV made his way to London, escorted by his maternal uncle, Earl Rivers. Assuming that Duke Richard would not interfere, Earl Rivers even arranged to meet with him. However, Duke Richard had long been suspicious of his sister-in-law. After her sudden marriage to King Edward IV, rumors swirled around her, claiming that she was descended from a sea witch and had cast a love spell on the king. Magic or none, Richard and the other great lords didn't want the Woodville family, barely more than commoners in their eyes, exercising power through a child king. When the news reached Richard, he hurried to meet his nephew on his journey to London, supposedly so he could escort him personally. On April 29, 1483, Duke Richard intercepted the royal entourage. After dining with them that evening, the following morning, Duke Richard had Earl Rivers and Elizabeth's son, Lord Richard Grey, arrested. They would later be executed at Pontefract Castle, supposedly for conspiring against Richard. Upon reaching London, Duke Richard had Edward placed in the Tower of London for his protection, supposedly. Elizabeth Woodville, fearing for her family's safety, sought sanctuary with her remaining children, including her other son, young Richard, the other heir to the throne. She took refuge in Westminster Abbey on April 1483. She brought so many possessions with her that the servants had to break down a section of the abbey walls to get everything inside. Meanwhile, Duke Richard placed his nephew Edward IV in the Tower of London's royal apartments. So far, the court supported Richard III, who seemed like the best bet to avoid a child king dominated by the Woodville family. As long as Elizabeth and her remaining children remained together in sanctuary, they were relatively safe. This became impossible to maintain when Duke Richard ordered that young Richard join his brother at the Tower on the pretext of being at his brother's side for the coronation. Although she resisted at first, Elizabeth finally bid farewell to young Richard, never to see him again. Legend has it that Elizabeth took part of the royal treasury with her into sanctuary and divided it between members of her family. Initially, putting Edward and young Richard in the Tower did not raise suspicions. The two boys remained young and vulnerable, and their safety was paramount. Additionally, the Tower was the starting point for the coronation process, and it was traditional for a new monarch to stay there until the ceremony. Richard, acting as protector and regent, scheduled his nephew's coronation for June 22, 1483. Duke Richard began preparations like minting coins. And suddenly, on young Edward's coronation day, a priest in Old St. Paul's Cathedral declared the two sons of Edward IV to be illegitimate, since their father had agreed to marry another woman named Lady Eleanor before he wed Elizabeth. As such, the boys were illegitimate, and conveniently for Uncle Richard, ineligible for the throne. With that, Duke Richard of Gloucester became heir to the throne, and with both princes in his power, publicly declared his claim on June 26th. The usurpation was backed by the Northern Army, which overawed London from its camp in Finsbury Fields. King Richard III and Queen Anne were crowned at Westminster Abbey on July 6, 1483. It remains unknown how much of a role Richard III played in the events that brought him to the throne, yet there is no doubt he benefited much from what transpired. Now, if these events sound a little too convenient for Duke Richard, many people at the time thought the same. The barefaced coup shocked the English court and split the ruling House of York. To this day, it is uncertain if Richard was motivated by personal ambition, because he feared the Woodville family, or because he wished to spare England another child king. In any case, King Richard III soon found many enemies at court, and he grew fearful of being usurped himself. And he knew that once his nephews came of age, any would-be rebel would almost certainly try to place them on the throne. The last reference to the two princes would be made on June 16th, when they were seen shooting arrows in the Tower of London's garden. An Italian ambassador recorded that Richard III withdrew them to the inner apartments of the Tower proper, and soon they ceased to appear altogether. If they were disappeared deliberately, it likely happened in the autumn of 1483. While final proof eludes historians, they remained in Uncle Richard's care, and he stood to benefit by their disappearance, and one simply does not waltz in and out of the Tower of London. Henceforth, politics at the time operated on the assumption that the princes were dead, which Richard never denied. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.